So, um, yeah, I think it's recording for everyone. So 5 minutes, few people on the call. So the way it works is we would typically run through your talk, where you run us through the conversation that we have. And as you said, people would drop in the questions in the comment section. One or two people from my team would send those questions to me during the course of our conversation, and then we're able to ask them to you, maybe midway or towards the end of whatever topic that you're currently talking on, and that's how we roll on the session. So questions come in and out really, but yeah. So by exactly 5:05, we'll get started. Sorry. So yeah, I needed the energy from I'm like, for coffee. So first of all, let me ask you, what kind of coffee culture do you have in the Netherlands?
Yeah, it's pretty strong. It's pretty strong, but I would say people don't drink fancy coffee, right? So they like the coffee as plain as possible.
So that's like black. Okay, great. Same here. Same here. All righty. Just give me a second. So yeah, I guess we could just kick off. Hi everyone, my name is Kassiana Majamite. As you are all aware, we've been doing having so far, and leading up until today, we expect nothing but the best also. And we don't just say that because we are hosting Build, but because we have a very special guest in our midst today that will be walking us through the topic that might have attracted most of you to join the conversation. But before we dive right into our guest, I'd like to introduce him as well as the topic. And what is even most fascinating is Michael's startup studio is called the Builder Studio. So it's not just about we being venture builders, but they own the space, both literally and figuratively. So it's really our pleasure to have Michael join us today. Michael Lier is the managing director for Builders. Is one of the co-founder, and previously Builders was known as We Are Builders. Michael is an entrepreneur, innovator, tech evangelist, dedicated to empowering the next wave of tech entrepreneurs. He has been in founding tech companies for over 2 decades. As a matter of fact, started his first company at the age of 17. He's founded and exited multiple software in the cloud-oriented company space, which he grew organically and exited with acquisition. Michael spent his career at the intersection of cloud hosting, tech startups, software consulting, and early stage investing, specializing in venture building, business development, product strategy, and user experience. Today, we'll be talking with Michael about how to recruit founders. And as a startup studio, we take it upon ourselves that one of the key ingredients of success that we bring to the table is our ability to find the right talent and being able to effectively allocate those talents into businesses and ensuring that they can return the reason why, or the value that we've placed them to create in those businesses. And again, to stress the importance of founders recruitment is, as with any organization, we do believe that there is the need for strong leadership. And as entrepreneurs who are venturing into the space of building new companies, we as Startup Studio, we understand the importance of people. And we know that without the right people, without the right team configuration, it's usually very difficult for founders to be successful in their endeavors. So the angle that we'll be looking at it today from is, one, as a startup studio, that we are, how we go about recruiting the kind of founders that build the kind of companies that we are proud of, both within our own region and as well as where Michael is based. And secondly, it's also the idea of we as startup studios, or even as entrepreneurs or founders on the call, how you go about with recruiting co-founders, because again, founder, co-founder, they're both the same thing. It's just a function of the job duty that they perform. And today, without spilling all of the juice, before Marco jumps on the call or introduce himself, further, I would like to say this particular session that we've organized, it's in line with our goal to ensure that build is not only about you understanding what the startup studio represents, but also understanding our processes, also understanding how you can benefit from the resources, the experience, and as well as the knowledge that the startup studio community at large embodies. And we're here to help entrepreneurs as well as different startup enthusiasts navigate that space of venture building and venture investing. So thank you so much for making the time, everyone, to join today's session. I do hope that you find it very insightful, as I have in previous sessions that I have attended where Michael has shared this topic. So without wasting so much of our time, Michael, over to you. Thank you so much for honoring our invitation.
Thanks, Kes, and thanks for those kind words. I don't have that nice of introduction for you, but I did find a great picture of you. So for today, we'd like to talk about the topic, how to hire your first ER, your entrepreneur in residence, AKA your future founder. So no matter if you're trying to hire by yourself or from a studio, I think there are some learnings in here that could help you find your co-founder, but also if you're running a studio, you can get like the insights on how we do these kind of things. First off, we're called builders. Of course, fits the subject matter really great. We focus on the future of work. We'd like to solve problems that people have at their workplace, daily challenges. And since we're now in this pandemic, we all have challenges at how to do our job and how to get the result that we want. And we try to accelerate human capital locally, but also globally around the world. I myself am 37 years old. I'm a serial entrepreneur. I like everything tech. I'm a real geek. But of course, I like to work with people, with co-founders to build great products. We just sold one of our first portfolio companies this year, which we're really proud of. And this also helps us to get more people on board and build more companies in the near future. So the future founder model. Well, again, guys, I'm going to show you a lot of processes and information that we use within our studio. I guess you could consider them building blocks to building your own model, because there's one thing we do at a studio is we try to make a process for anything you can think of. I mean, we have a process for getting a cup of coffee, right? So if you think it's too much, just take whatever fits your needs to get to a point where you can find your future founder. So this is our model. We use three main, let's say, programs to get to our goal. The first is sourcing and recruitment, then an ER program, and then some management for the future founder. Now we'll go into these three, all of these three, a bit more in detail. So if you have questions about them, I'll answer a few of those during these few minutes. And I think what's the most important thing to note is that finding a future founder is not a thing you can do on the side or something that you could just do for a few hours a week. It's something that's really intensive. It's not just recruiting. It's everything or nothing. So let's go into that.
Sorry, Michael, do you mind speaking up a bit? I think the volume is low on your end.
No problem. Is it better? So sourcing and recruitment. First off, so like with any position, even your future co-founder is something you could recruit. Basically meaning if you put your vacancy up at LinkedIn, people are going to respond to that. And we've had many people tell us it's impossible to find your founder that way. And true entrepreneurs are not sourcing on LinkedIn, and they're not looking for vacancies on those kind of job boards or whatever. I can tell you this is totally false. The best founders out there, founders to LinkedIn ad, telling you should try and see if you fit this profile. LinkedIn has great algorithms telling you, hey, you're a founder. Don't you think this position is great for you? So it's more or less really about sourcing and recruitment. And what we do is we try to build a network of these future founders as a studio, of course, throughout the year. So we get contacted about these kind of positions each day, and we try to give everybody the same kind of attention and detail to make a CRM, so to say, of all the people we could potentially work with and could match together. Because like with most companies, we also like 2 co-founders next to the studio within our companies. So normal recruitment, put there in a CRM is a real important part of finding your ER. But how do you actually know if there's a great match, right? So we have 2 things to find those specific matches. I'll first go into the love letters part, which is something we've been doing since, I think 2 months. And what one would do is, let's say you are the CEO. I think the most people on the line here are looking for like the next co-founder, right? You are the CEO and you're looking for your co-founder. Next to like looking on LinkedIn or putting up a vacancy, we found out that if you write a letter to your future founder, let's say a love letter, and you tell them what you've been working on, why you're so passionate about what you're working on, what you are looking for in a co-founder, what do you think the culture should be, all the things you tell your friends and family, put it into a letter, put it out there on Medium and tell people, hey, if you're interested, look at my letter. And what we decided to do at the end of this, what kind of pet you have. And we've seen that the people who've read that letter and responded to that gave the most personal and insightful responses we've ever seen. So this is another way to do the recruitment, let's say the other way around. And because this is a fairly new thing, this gets shared a lot by our network as well. As, hey, look at this might be something for you. And is a real good way to recruit your co-founder. Let's say once you get them in, you have a list of your potential co-founders. How would one go about and to find out, is there an actual match? There are like a gazillion ways to do this. One of the steps we take is a psychometric test. And I think this is really a nice thing to show you in a bit more detail is you got the guy or girl in, how do you know it's a match? This is the end result of a psychometric test. The psychometric test takes the behavior and all of the traits of the person you like to match with and maps them on the matrix you see at the right. And why is this important to us? Is that instead of just getting the answers or doing a Zoom call, this shows all of the specific areas the co-founder naturally gets energy from. And why is this so helpful is that as with a company starts at the purple part, that vision, and then goes to strategy, action, and then goes to structure. So purple, blue, red, green. A lot of people we've met are, for example, really strong on the vision, but maybe a bit less strong on the action. Doesn't mean they can't do it. It means this kind of test shows you if they get energy from it. They're excited to do that. And what you could do with these kind of tests, and there, if you'd like to use these tests, just send me a LinkedIn message and I'll send you all the information, is you could see if you are complementary on each other. So for example, if I should do this psychometric test and match with this person you see on the screen, it would be really helpful if I'm really strong at strategy. And this way you build like a 360 profile of the person you'd like to match with. And this report also goes a bit into, hey, what are the personality traits? Is this person prone to walk away from conflict or walk towards conflict, or is he or she really entrepreneurial? And it also shows the next steps the person should take in his career. A lot of the times, these kind of tests tell us that the person should not be a co-founder of the company. It should join a big corporate. So this gives you a way to get more data about the person you try to match with, but also it gives a bit of, I don't know, for them, it shows them how they could develop their own personal skills. So you also add some value to your potential co-founder. And these are the steps we take to go through a recruiting process next to the normal steps you all take. We always put in this psychometric test as one of the 1 or 2 last steps to make sure we like get that 360 feel of what we should be doing. So let's say you found the one, and at a studio we're looking for, of course, our first ER, because that's the subject matter. How would one test that the one you try to work with is actually fit for the job? And as with anything within a startup, you're trying to do validation, right? Sometimes it's product market fit, sometimes it's founder solution fit, or even something like that. So you'd like to go to an ER program. What is an ER program? I think I got a visual on that, which shows this a bit better. An ER program at our company, at our studio at least, is an extensive program of going to all kinds of steps to actually go from ID to validated ID. And this means is that we didn't incorporate the company yet. So for us, the ER program is, hey, we found a match. Let's start working on this ID we have and see if we could do as much validation as we can before actually incorporating a company. And for a studio, this basically means is don't spend too much of your capital, don't spend too much of your time on creating a new company, but try to figure out if this ID is going to get off the ground, but also, is this CEO the right person to get this ID off the ground? More or less the founder ID fit. And such a program could consist of any of these building blocks. For us, it consists of some sort of ideation and validation. I guess, Cass, you're going into this with the build program as well. Basically meaning you're getting on the phone with potential customers, you're learning for them, you're figuring out what the real problem is, and you're like making a solution that fits that as well. Also, within this entrepreneur in residence program, we try to figure out, is this founder able to find a go-to-market strategy? Can we do like experiments on that? Can we build landing pages with people actually sign up on those? And maybe one of the most important ones, can we find, so let's suggest we just found the CEO, and in our case, we also like a CTO in those companies. Can we match another founder to this first CEO? And in this example, CTO recruitment takes around, I would say, half or a third of the time of the entire ER program to find the right match. And that CTO is going through the same process we're just talking about, and he will have an ER program as well, but then focus not on ideation and validation, but more or less on technical feasibility and can we actually build it. So at the end of any ER program, we ask our co-founders to do something very difficult. And I don't know if you guys want to do this or should do this, but we actually ask our potential CEOs, because they're still ERs, to sign the first 10 deals before even creating a new company. So, and to do that, they need some sort of branding and culture in place. So we help them create the brand, even create the name of the company, so they could start signing 10 deals before even launching the new co.
Sorry, Michael, I just want to like chip in on the EIR program because
Well,
I know for some it's a familiar terrain, and for um, others it might be for the first time, they're hearing the terminology EIR. But
yeah,
essentially, the EIR represents the CEO, as you mentioned. And so when you say sign the first, deals, is this like in standard recruitment process, or this is like post recruitment process or confirmation? Like, what would that sit, or where would that sit in traditional recruitment if you want to look at that signing the deal as part of the
oh,
process?
yeah, thanks for asking that. So basically, one would source a CEO, you could say entrepreneur, and let's say you think it's a fit, then you would give the CEO a contract to become an entrepreneur in residence at your studio. So you will start working under the name of the studio, and during those mostly 4 months period, they will go to these steps, right? The ideation, go to market, finding their CTO, still under the flag of the studio. So when you get to the end of those 4 months, you validated there's an actual solution to be sold, and you actually want to start building that new code, that company. So then we tell you, if you can prove us you could sign 10 deals before even starting the company, then you're allowed to start the company with us. So it's more or less another validation, but the CEO already has a contract at the studio. But now, after he validates that he can sell the product, then we're actually at that point we're just starting to build the new co. So a studio takes all of those steps of I'm trying to build a company, I'm incorporating it, I'm doing all of that. We're not doing that until we actually know that there's value to be gained in the market.
And if for example, for whatever reason they weren't able to meet this mark, do you sort of like rinse and repeat? I mean, I know that's what happens typically for most studios till we find how useful, like you said, one thing is to find the culture fit, the other is to find the founder idea fit. So if they tried this and from the evaluation it's a product failure, I'm assuming that you would recycle the founder or the entrepreneur in resident on another portfolio company or a new product altogether. So that it works for
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, that's something we of course try to do. I wouldn't say that's a possibility every time, because of course as a studio you have an ID, for example, in the real estate space, and then of course the first person you try to hire, that entrepreneur, has a strong, you know, feeling of that space, of the real estate space. So it could be that when he doesn't sign, or he or she doesn't sign, or the validation doesn't come to fruition, that he or she is like, okay, so I'm not going to work on something else because this was my thing, right? But if possible, a studio is trying to rinse and repeat as much of the human capital they have. And I think also that's one of the stronger points of the studio. But until now, it didn't mean that the founder wanted to do that again, right? So it depends. You could also be out. All right. So in this example, we'll assume that you signed the 10 deals and we didn't rinse and repeat the cash. And then we actually are ready to build that new co.
I'm just being devil's advocate, trying to be, making sure we carry the audience along with this new concept that we might be sharing today. So yes, go ahead, Michael.
So we built that company. And now we're asking ourselves as a studio, how can we make sure we keep track of what we're doing here? And there's with the studio, there's a new like playing field, because for the studio, they're like selecting founders to work with, but you're of course partners. So you're now getting to a point you can't like have a normal evaluation with your partner. It should be more or less on the same level. So when we incorporate a new company, we try to give as much attention to that partnership, to that relation you now have, because you're going to run with this company probably for 5 to 10 years. So because we like models, of course, we created a model which basically helps you improve your relationship with your founder. And it all makes a lot of sense, but I think the most important thing to stress is here, please have this reflective moments. I'm going to tell you about, and please make sure you do, right? So, for example, we have a process planning board, which says, all right, so in these next 4 months, we're focusing on these 5 subjects. We need to get to these KPIs and goals, else we won't be successful. And to reach these goals, we're going to talk about this weekly, because of course we're a new company, we're excited, and we do everything we can to make it a success. But it's actually really important to have processes in place early on to talk about your goals and to be reflective. And to make sure that the corporation is still working out, right? The founders that are working together, we talk to our founders each 3 months, and in the first month of the corporation we talk a bit more, but every 3 months we talk about, hey, do you think this is working out? Are there any issues here? Can we talk about those? And then we all get to say on which kind of subjects we want to talk about the actual corporation. Is this working out? Is the, let's say, trifold of CEO, CTO, and studio still effective? And to be and then to add one more layer, and I call it founder counseling, is that, of course, there are also some things you don't like about your co-founder, right? That's always the case. So at the studio, we try to do, let's say, relationship counseling before we actually get divorced, right? So we call that supportive confrontation, which is something you could do, all of you could do, which you let the other founders tell you about what they think about you in a very confrontive manner. And we do this a lot of the times with all the founders. This is a real hard conversation to have, but also a real nice one to do, to make sure that your company gets to like the finish line, because of course this is a partnership. So this way, with future founder management, we make sure that all of the founders get the same attention, that we're following a process of delivering for each other because we're working together, and also to make sure that we get to our first goals. And for our studio builders, our process is that we take that first ID to Series A, which takes around 18 months. So we'll be doing this for the first 1.5 years to make sure we have a fruitful relationship. So that's actually the end of my talk, Cass, and I thought I'd put up a cozy fire to talk with you about this.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Michael. I think the most important thing for me in all of this process in recruiting founders or co-founders is how we go about the sort of systematic process of identifying the talent in itself, and then move from identifying those talents into sort of like integrating them into the studio. And it could be a studio, it could be a startup, because sometimes it's always about trying to find the right, EIR for spin out, right? So how do you sort of like integrate these founders with existing businesses? How do you sort of like work on that? So you mentioned founder ID fit. What about founder culture fit, right? For maybe an existing startup or portfolio company within the studio, or not even within the studio altogether, for maybe a co-founder, for example, that's trying to get a CTO or to work with. How?
Yeah, interesting question. A great question. Thanks for asking that question. The answer is twofold. So of course we try to match a co-founder with our own studio culture. But the most important thing is that the CEO, which we get on board first, has also an idea about how he likes to shape his own culture. So within the EER program, we also go to like the branding and the culture part to make sure we describe what kind of culture we want. And then when we try to hire, for example, CTO, the entrepreneur in residence is actually responsible for doing that culture fit. And with the psychometric model, we of course get some information, but the CEO has his own responsibility. The reason we do that is that around, let's say, 1.5 years later, they might spin out of the studio, and more or less they would have their own culture. They would have created their own way of doing things. They might have a team of already 15 to 20 people. There's no way we can keep them close to our own culture, so to say. So this is something the CEO actually creates and maintains.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I get it. So essentially, from the EIR perspective, just coming on the team already means they're sort of like pre-qualified for minimum culture, and then they would be, required to sort of like continue or sort of kickstart a culture that if it is fitting for the portfolio or the startup that they're building. That makes sense. The other question I have on my list really is around, so there's a lot of things that makes a great founder or a great co-founder. What are some of your examples, like, in working with founders at the early stage? You mentioned something about supportive confrontation.
Yes.
For me, that's the first time I'm saying that, to be honest. And, it's quite interesting, the concept behind that. Was there a case in point that led to that? And what has been the, examples of, founders' confrontation, and how has that sort of ended, in divorce or reconciliation and building?
Okay, I'm not going to say no comment on this, but I got to be careful on this one. The reason you do this is you all get to a point where you're like, okay, so is this company not working, or is this collaboration not working, right? So is my founding team the right set of people? And you could talk strategy and pivoting all day long. And, we're in the startup game, so we like to talk pivots, and it's the product, and it's this, and it's that. What we actually learned is that a lot of the problems strip down to, it's the problem of the founding team. And you could talk to each other in like your normal weekly meeting, and you could have talked about everything, and you think you know everything, and still it doesn't seem to click. This is why we have supportive confrontation. It's because we've learned in certain situations, everything was perfect, but it didn't work out. So it was the best product in the world, the best strategy, everything should have been golden. What supportive confrontation does is more or less, you prepare really hard answers to hard questions, and you're allowed to, for example, what do you think about Cass's way of approaching, the way he uses the budget? I could have like 2 sentences on to describe how I actually think you go about these things, and I'm allowed to tell them to you, and you're not allowed to respond to those. So you're only allowed to like sink those questions in and say thank you. And then of course the other party gets the same kind of 2 sentences talking about you. This way you can talk about your issues with your co-founders. And of course there are some smart questions in those, without having to fear for the wrath of your co-founder. And it's a way of getting things out of your system. We've learned that if we do this frequently, let's say once each year, or maybe once each 6 months if it's necessary, we avoid major conflict. And meaning if we don't do it, we get into like fights. Your co-founders, you're passionate, you get fights about everything, right? So this is the way to make sure that you don't end up in a really awful, let's say, fight about the company.
Right. That makes absolute sense, because I was just wondering, when you say supportive confrontation, kind of like ironic situation, but now it sort of makes a conclusive sense. And I think we can even overemphasize the importance of having the right founding team, as you alluded to, by answering that question. So looking at the founders, future founder management, for SeedCap, for example, the goal is about sustainability and, transferring the skill set of, venture building, which in turn also raising the right type of, or collaborating with the right type of EIRs. How do you think like other startup founders can sort of adopt this your process for founder management? Basically from the process planning. So it's, maybe you walk us through in terms of, when you say process planning, are you looking at in terms of job functions, or in terms of basically just saying through this 4 months period, we're going to work on this process, and who is responsible for the process? Is it at the studio level, or the founders can also be responsible for managing, themselves with this same system?
Yeah, so basically the studio sets out the, let's say, the KPIs and the metrics and how to get it done. So for example, I've showed this really briefly, maybe this is one of the examples that we use for process planning. And all of these have like in-depth descriptions about what we think it is. And this is about an EER program. So for example, this would go into, we're gonna do user story mapping these 3 weeks. We expect you to get these deliverables. So what we do is we talk about this like in advance to make like a planning for, let's say, a quarter on what we'd like to achieve and how are we going to do that. And of course, this is like a guideline because you're not going to make those deadlines most of the time, but it ensures you take the steps and you also stop at some certain points. For example, we've talked about this case is that you want to make a product, you want to make the most beautiful thing in the world, or you're going to make an MVP. Where are you actually going to stop? And the best innovation comes from giving yourself a deadline and making sure that you know what you could make in that time, right? So we try to give those processes and deadlines in place. And for our founders, all these processes are completely transparent. You can find all of those in our Notion, which is a note-taking tool which shows all the processes. And they could read in on that, what we think is suitable for the situation. And of course, they could add their own experience, because most of the founders we now start working with are more experienced than we are ourselves, right? So they're excellent operators who just want to make the best company in the world. And we try to give them a few pointers on we think makes the best product. And as a studio, there's the second thing we need to do is that we as a studio also have investors. So our investors expect us to have a certain level of deliverables throughout this process. So with this, we make sure we get our money and we can put it in the company. So it also gives you some sort of gratification. If you follow the process, you get funded, and you could go to the next step.
Right. And speaking of funding, do EIRs get compensation for that 4-month period, or how do you bake in the compensation for founders? And again, that question is like A and B. So that's the A. The B would be, given the traditional or typical concept of who a founder is or an entrepreneur is, how do you go about the compensation conversation? Like, because yes, they already have like deliverables, which is great. How do you ensure that they're motivated, especially when they're working with the studio on a different, project or something?
Yeah. First off, like in general within studios, I did a lot of research on this, and I talked to a lot of studios about this, and it seems to be different in the US and let's say Africa and Europe. They're all kind of different models, but the general demeanor would be is that a founder or ER would get paid in the US 1/3 of its market value, and in Europe it's more or less like 60% of its market value. So if you could make 50K a year with the knowledge you have now, you would get like somewhere between half and 60% of that, right? So around 35K. So our ER program is actually scheduled or structured the same way. So you get the same pay you would get as a future founder, for example, half your market salary, which is enough to make sure you could run your life, right? Have your house, have your family, but it's not getting you rich. The reason for that is that depending on the kind of studio you run, you're of course on a lot of equity as well. And within our model, our future founders own 1/3 of the company each. So the studio is a third co-founder, owns around 1/3, and the CEO, CTO, and maybe some team members own 2/3 of the new co. So the value that gets into that company is actually the most important thing you should see. So the compensation isn't that great in the first few months, but the studio will invest, in our case, 250,000 euros to get that company off the ground. And as a human capital, so the people, the growth managers, the tech people, even the legal and admin people will also be included into this investment, which is an additional 250,000 euros. So we of course tell them, if you run with us, you're going to get a lot of, let's say, it's unrealized, but a lot of equity value for what you're doing here. And if you're not going to be able to take a cut out of your market salary, then you shouldn't become an entrepreneur with us, because we should be really, really easy on spending the budget, right?
Fantastic. I think that is about the answer I was kind of expecting, because I think there's a huge divide really when a lot of people hear about the openings for founders, and it seems like they're going to get rich out of being recruited as founders, and then you have to go through that sort of like education. So just trying to take a pulse check, you know, given where you are based, how is that orientation like? I mean, in Nigeria in particular, where we are trying to create and, you know, keep emphasizing and sort of like driving the knowledge around, you know, being a founder is like, it's like a day job. It's a day job, you know, it's nothing but a title. The only value that comes with that title is that you get to have vested ownership over a period of time or immediately, depending on the agreement. So how does that conversation sort of pan out, or how is it going currently in your region, and what is the pulse like?
So hopefully I understand your question correctly, is that first off, our founders and ourselves, we vest our shares, right? So basically meaning that if you get 1/3 of the shares, it takes 4 years to own that piece of the company. And if you would quit, for example, after 2 years, you would own a portion of those shares, and the rest you have to return for nothing, basically. So you have to work for your equity, so to say. It's actually a job. I actually think that in the Netherlands, we are really entrepreneurial, and we're more and more grasping the concept of what is it like to be an entrepreneur and how you carry that responsibility. I used to think that it was working your ass off is the best way of saying you're an entrepreneur. You're doing as much as you can whenever you can. I nowadays think it's important to be like whole, right? So to make sure that you also think about the team and your mental health as well, and that the concept of a founder used to be, I don't know, you're a CEO, you can do everything, you should work your ass off. Nowadays we see entrepreneurships as different types of areas, right? Like growth, like you're doing product, you could be really good at marketing, or you could be really good at your team. And what you nowadays see is that studios are getting more popular because of this, is because you could say, I do growth and I do marketing and team really well. And I'm looking for a studio who could like emphasize that, but also do tech and do ops as well. So I think looking at what entrepreneurship is in the Netherlands, they more or less take it apart a bit more, and they're not afraid to tell you about what they're good at and what they might be not so good at, so that they could be more great entrepreneurs. So this opens up the market for new entrepreneurial people who are not the I can do it all people, but I'm really good at these specific fields and I'm looking for cooperation partners. So we've been getting, I guess, 5 new future founder people each week to come into our network. So I would say our market is heating up for like doing this model.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty much the same. We do get roughly like 2-3 new founder requests that, you know, every other week. just one question before I pick up the question in the comments.
Sure.
What are the sort of if you will, the qualities that makes a founder as opposed to a teammate? Do you get what I mean? So if you, even though you're looking for specialized people to become entrepreneurs, what are the specialized skill sets that distinguish a co-founder that, would work with a studio and go farther along the way as opposed to, maybe an average founder?
Yeah, and great question and really hard one to answer. And I think I should use an example is that we tell our, for example, CTOs that you should be able to program software yourself and to also build the team. And of course, this is a really strange thing to ask because most people who manage a team are not really coding anymore. But that's basically the skill set or trait you're looking for. You are able to be really hands-on, but also take responsibility and create a team around you to complete the task at hand. So entrepreneurial for us is also knowing when you should not build the thing and you should build the team. And there's a lot of skill sets which you could say these are entrepreneurial and these are not. I would say somebody which is your normal team member would say, hey, I've done my job, I'm now going home. But the entrepreneur is thinking about how can I scale myself and how can I scale my area of expertise, let's say tech or product, to a level that the whole company could grow with it. And this kind of mindset is not seen that much, even not within entrepreneurs, right? Most entrepreneurs, kind of, myself included, I failed this once before, is fail at scaling their sales, right? So if they don't have a plan for that, I would say skip those people.
I have a question from Sunny. Okay, so let me read the question. It says, it seems that builders tend to work with experienced founders. What do you think of working with first-time founders and transition from mid-career with plenty of industry experience and adding a component of learning that is training and coaching, mentoring in addition to your role? I don't know if you get the question, but I think the question is asking about working with first-time founders, like particularly with builders. You only work with experienced founders, and how do you help with sort of like transitioning, people with mid-level career with industry experience into becoming, founders, and what other components do you factor into that process?
Yeah, first off, it's not that we or studios don't like to work with first-time founders. It's more or less a mantra we've been living by, is that once you've run a company, you've learned that it takes way more effort. It takes a lot of energy, pain. I mean, love, but hate as well to run a company. It's not that easy as we idolize this thing to be. And the experience you gain during this first company or first project, it could be a big entrepreneurial project, right? It doesn't have to be a company, is the experience we're actually talking about. It's that you know what it takes and what it does to you when you get to that point, when you're running a company and get all that stress and responsibility for your team, but also for your customers. So that's basically why we're asking experienced entrepreneurs, is that we firmly believe that first, I would not say failure, but that first company you run will learn you so much. These learnings should be baked into the founders we work with. And please keep in mind, all the people within the studio have run 6 to 7 companies, are experienced operators, are on top of their game. So when the founder they work with make first-time mistakes, it's really, really hard for them to stay energized and to grow your company. Secondly, of course, we work with industry experts. We love them. Doesn't mean that they're the CEO, but it could mean that they're like one of the founding team members. They could be really strong in their expert matter, join the team, even own shares within the company at incorporation, because they're, of course, really, really important. But as a CEO or CTO, we're more or less set on, it's really important to have done that initial company experience yourself. And to give other people, let's say, a view into what we're doing, we, for example, allow founder traineeships, founder associate traineeships, I should say, which helps other people join our ERs or future founders in their journey and help them get the idea on board and get that experience, right? So if they really want to, there is a way into the studio and get that experience, but we can't give it to those credits to a CEO. Hopefully that answers the question. Sorry.
I would believe so, because just to chime in a bit on that as well, it's even in our experience of working with first-time entrepreneurs, you're quite spot on that. I think what we've learned from that journey is, if you've really not been so hands-on into the different phases and the different stages of venture building and venture scaling, it's really hard to recruit the founders, because there is a very thin line between audacity, ambition, and sort of like operationalizing what is required to execute, right? So I think the mix that, as I'm sure builders looks for this as well, but at SeedCap we also look for people who are able to operationalize the different manuals, the different playbooks, and as well as also ensuring that they're able to have that drive. I think for me, one of the critical things is the drive of sorry, I don't know if everyone can hear me. Okay, so it's like the drive. So if that drive is missing, it becomes very difficult to motivate founders, because founders, from my experience, from other founders, and even studio operators like yourself, I think it's really about that self-driven and scaling whatever they know and themselves into the immediate environment where they function, that is the studio, and as well as the community of the product that they are building. And it's very rare to find that in first-time founders, because there's a lot of learning that you have to go through. What we've learned from our own experience is that it's not just about product development. I think one of the distinguishing factors, like you said, is there is a huge difference between building a product and running a tech business. Yeah. And so when people start running the business, they realize that there are multi-layer of activities that they need to go through. So it's interesting that this is what we've learned. And again, in regards to the second part of that question with mid-level or mid-career executive, it's the same thing. It's like you can be very good at marketing, or good at partnerships, or good at signing on deals, but when it has to do with the burden of running a business day to day, from running the teams, from running the projects, from running even the finance and all of those sort of like micro layers, you would need someone to walk you through. And I quite love what you're doing with the Entrepreneurs Associate Program, because I think it gives a lot of people the opportunity to sort of have on-the-job sort of learning and experience that they can sort of like apply towards becoming a founder as well at the studio. So again, if there's any other question, it would be great to see if there's any other question. But in the absence of questions, I think we've learned a lot from your very meticulous and rigorous process, as Sunny said in her question. And I think for us, at SeedCap, it's really a privilege that you've been able to walk us through how Builder goes about in sourcing and recruiting entrepreneurs. As you mentioned, some of these resources I'm sure you will share with us. We'll be able to share with our large community as well. On behalf of everyone at SeedCap, Michael, it's really our pleasure to have hosted you on this topic. Thank you for sharing your vast knowledge and experience, as well as insights on this topic. We do look forward to engaging you subsequently in the future. To all our guests and attendees, thank you very much for making today an interesting one with your attendance as well. It's our pleasure, and we'll see you in the next session of Build. Do have a wonderful day, a wonderful weekend, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me.
Have a wonderful day. Bye.